very good morning, children. So, well, in the last class, I have discussed about that is the reference point to find out any position or location of an object. So, there we are going to specify it through the reference point in the specify marking, or it is also called as origin. So this origin in the we can predict whether the object is in motion or the object is in rest and predict model. Then after this we have studied about that is the motion along a straight line, that is which is the very simplest type of motion when compared to other types of motion we compare model. So the motion along a straight line is the simplest type of motion. Then under this that is motion along a straight line, so we have discussed the two important physical quantities. So one is the distance traveled, so another is the displacement. So now I am going to list out some of the important points regarding to the distance traveled as well as the displacement. Here first, this is distance and this is displacement. So in distance we have studied that the total distance means the total path length, covered by the object. So distance means it is the total path length covered by the object. Then in displacement we have learned it is the shortest distance between the initial point and final point. So the shortest distance between the initial point and the final point, we are going to call it as displacement. The total path length covered by the object is called as the distance. So the next important point is, so distance depends on path. So distance is going to depend on path. The next, what your displacement is, it is independent of path. So that means, so here displacementally, so path na adu depend agiralla, so it is independent of path anta ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. So it considers, so what matters for the displacement, that is the final point and the initial point. So object to final position ellitu, initial position ellitu. So that only matters for the displacement. Even we can find out the displacement by the difference, by finding out the difference between the final point and initial point. Madhye irunta difference na ನಾವು find out ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ we can tell the displacement of the object. So the next important point regarding to the distance is, so in distance we consider only the numerical value. So distance alli ನಾವು ಬರೀ numerical value ಮಾತ್ರ consider ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So which is the physical quantity, so which is having only numerical value, right? So it is called as magnitude. So the next, if you come to displacement, so displacement depends on both numerical value as well as the direction. So in the last class, while explaining about the displacement, I have given one example. In that example, when the object changed its direction, so direction will change madanga. So there we can see that value under displacement na value enayitu change ayitu. So that shows that displacements depend on both numerical value as well as the direction. So that means we can say, so it is having both magnitude plus direction. So ಎರಡು ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೆ, displacement. So here the physical quantity which have only magnitude. So magnitude ಮಾತ್ರ ಇದ್ರೆ we call that as a scalar quantity ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೀವಿ. So because distance is having only magnitude, so distance now we are going to call it as scalar quantity. So distance is a scalar quantity and displacement is a vector quantity. So the next important point regarding to the distance and displacement, that is here the SI unit of distance is meter, and also the SI unit of displacement is also meter. So both distance and displacement is having the same unit, that is meter, and it is denoted by the small letter m in the denote market. Then the very important point regarding distance and displacement. So the last important point, suppose if an object travels from point A to point B. So let us assume that object has started its journey from point A and it has moved up to point B. So it has traveled 5 meter. Then we can write AB is equal to 5 meter. Suppose if the object move again from B point to A point, if the object come back from B to A point, so we can write BA is also 5 meter. Then what is the total distance in this case? So the total distance is equal to, that is AB plus BA, that is 5 meter plus 5 meter is equal to 10 meter. So this is the total distance covered by the object when it moved from point A to point B, and again it comes back from point B to point A. So this is about displacement. So what will happen to the, this is about the distance. Then what will happen to the displacement means, suppose if the object moved from point A to point B again it comes back to the same position from which it has started. ಯಾವ point ಇಂದ start ಆಯಿತೋ ಮತ್ತು ಅದೇ point ಗೆ ಬಂದು end ಆಗಲ್ಲ. So well, I told that displacement ಅಲ್ಲಿ it matters only the final position and initial position. So point A ಇಂದ point B ಹೋಗಿದೆ. So again it has come back to the same point ಗೆ ವಾಪಸ್ ಬಂದಾಗ the initial and the final position will merges each other, ಅಥವಾ it will coincide with each other. So the coincide ಆದಾಗ the displacement will be 0. So but not the distance traveled. So initial point and final point, if it merges, merge ಆದಾಗ displacement will be equal to 0 but not the distance traveled. So these are the important points regarding to the two physical quantities that we have learned in the last class, that is distance traveled and displacement. So the next important topics that we are going to study in this class, that is uniform motion. So uniform motion and non-uniform motion. So uniform motion and non-uniform motion. So first I am going to explain what is uniform motion, then afterwards I will define what is non-uniform motion. Here to explain or to define the uniform motion, I am going to consider an example. So through that example we will define what is uniform motion. So to define uniform motion, here I am going to consider the example. So in that example, let us assume that the object is moving in a straight line. So because we are going to study the motion along a straight line and study mattaradrinda, here we have to consider that object is moving in a straight line, or we have to assume that object is moving in a straight line antane assume ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, ಅಥವಾ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ನ ನಾವು ಸ್ಟ್ರೈಟ್ ಲೈನ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇದೆ ಅಂತಾನೆ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. Now I have considered that the object is moving in a straight line and it started its journey from point A. So it is starting its journey from up to point B ತನಕ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗಿದೆ. So to move from point A to point B, it has taken a time of 1 hour. So the next, in that 1 hour, it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. So the next, we shall consider the object has moved from point B to point C. So now it is moving from point B to point C. So here also the object has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. So the next, the object has moved from point C to point D. So here also it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour it has covered a distance of 100 kilometers. Now we shall compare the time at different instants. So here if you just compare the time to move from point A to point B, it has taken 1 hour. Then from B to C, again it has taken a time of 1 hour. Then C to D, here also the time taken by the object is 1 hour. So if you just observe the time at different instants, so we can tell that the time is equal. So the object taken, the time taken by the object is equal. So now we shall compare the distance covered by the object at different instants. Here, if you just observe the distance from A to B, it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. Then to move from B to C, here also it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. Then C to D, then also it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. So from that example, we can say the distance covered by the object is also equal. Just by looking at this example, so how we are going to define the uniform motion. So here we can define uniform motion as if an object covers equal distance in equal time interval, then such type of motion we are going to call it as uniform motion. So the object to equal distance na equal time alli cover madidre, then such type of motion we are going to call it as uniform motion. So let me write down the definition of uniform motion. So it is a very important definition. If an object covers equal distance in equal intervals of time, so this is called as uniform motion. So here the very important is the equal distance in equal intervals of time. So then after the, let me give some of the examples for the uniform motion. For examples of uniform motion, we can take the rotation and the revolution of the earth. So rotation and revolution of earth na, so we can consider it as a uniform motion. So the next we shall move on to the next type of motion, that is non-uniform motion. Non-uniform motion. To define the non-uniform motion, I am going to consider the example. So with that example, we will define what is non-uniform motion. Here, then I am going to again consider that the object is moving in a straight line because it is motion along a straight line. Now let us assume that the object has started its journey from point A. So object is starting its journey from point A and it has moved up to point B. So it has moved from point A to point B. So to move from point A to point B, it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour, it has covered a distance of 100 kilometers. So So object has moved from point A to point B. So to move from point A to point B, it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour, it has covered a distance of 100 kilometer. So the next, the object has moved from point B to point C. So here also the object has taken a time of 1 hour. But in that 1 hour, it has covered only the 80 kilometers. So 80 kilometers na matra ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದೆ cover ಮಾಡಿದೆ. So the next, we shall consider that the object has moved from point C to point D. So to move from point C to point D, again it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour, it has covered only the 55 kilometers na cover ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಅಂತ let us assume that. Now we shall compare the time and distance at different intervals. So here, if you just observe the time covered by the object at different instants, that is to move from point A to point B, then point B to point C, then C to D, the time taken by the object is equal. That is 1 hour correct? But if you just observe the distance covered by the object at different intervals, that is to move from A to B, it has covered 100 kilometer, then B to C, it has covered only 80 kilometers, from C to D, it has covered the 55 kilometers. So the distance covered by the object is unequal. So we can say the distance covered by the object is unequal. Then how we are going to define the non-uniform motion? So just by looking the example, so we can say the object has covered unequal distance in equal intervals of time. So then such type of motion we are going to define as non-uniform motion. So object to unequal distances na equal intervals of time alli ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, so such type of motion we are going to call it as non-uniform motion. So let me write down the definition. If an object covers unequal distance in equal intervals of time. So here this is very important, unequal distance in equal intervals of time, because in uniform motion the distance and the time will be equal, but in non-uniform motion, so the distance is unequal but the time taken by the object is equal. Then what are the examples for the non-uniform motion? Well, in our day-to-day life study, so we cannot follow the uniform motions na follow ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. So that means we cannot cover all the time, we cannot cover equal distance in equal intervals of time ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು cover ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. So in our day-to-day life we are going to follow the non-uniform motions na follow ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So examples ಹೇಳೋದಾದ್ರೆ, if you are moving in a crowded street, or if the car is moving in a crowded street ಅಲ್ಲಿ move ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರೆ, so this will be an example for non-uniform motion. So but remember that every time we cannot move in a uniform motion in our day-to-day life, so we are going to follow the non-uniform motions na follow ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So this is about the definition for uniform and non-uniform motion. Then after this, the next topic that we are going to learn, that is measuring of rate of motion. Well, in the first class itself I defined what is motion. So here we are going to measure the rate of motion. So rate of motion means we are going to measure the motion with respect to time ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ measure ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So let me understand this topic through example. So very first I am going to consider that the object is moving in a straight line because we are studying the motion along a straight line. So now I am going to assume, or let us assume that the object has started its journey from point X and it has moved up to point Y. So now I am assuming that the object is moving in a straight line and it has started its journey from point X and it has moved up to point Y. So to move from point X to point Y, the object has covered a distance of 80 kilometers. So let us assume that the object has covered a distance of 80 kilometers to move from point X to point Y. Now let us assume a person A. So a person A has how much time he has taken to cover this distance of 80 kilometer. So the person A, so how he distance na cover madadike, so how much time he has taken. So let us assume that the person A has taken a time of 1 hour. So A ಅನ್ನೋ person 1 hour time na ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾನೆ to travel a distance of 80 kilometer. So next we shall consider the other person. So another person, that is person B. Now we shall find out so how much time this person has taken to cover the same distance, that is 80 kilometer. So he has taken a time of 2 hours. Same distance na cover madadike. So the person B has taken 2 hours. So next let us take another person C. So now this person has taken that is 2.5 hours to cover the same distance, that is 80 kilometers. If you just observe this example, so the distance, the given distance, that is 80 kilometer distance in there, to cover that same distance, different persons are taking different time to cover the same distance. Here the A has taken 1 hour, B has taken the 2 hour and C has taken the 2.5 hour to cover the same distance. Then how we are going to find out the distance traveled by an object in unit time. So one object ಈ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಈಗ 1 ಅವರ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಡಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಹೌ ಟು ಫೈಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ಇಟ್, ಹಿಂಗ್ ಫೈಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಫಾರ್ 2 ಅವರ್ಸ್ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ 2 ಅವರ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಆ 2 ಅವರ್ಸ್ ಟ್ರಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಹೌ ಮಚ್ ಡಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಕವರ್ಡ್, ಎಷ್ಟು ಡಿಸ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಹೌ ಟು ಫೈಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ದಿಸ್ ಆರ್ ಹೌ ಟು ಮೆಷರ್ ದಿಸ್ rate of motion. So to measure this rate of motion, so there comes a physical quantity, that is speed ahead. So to measure the distance in unit time, so there comes the physical quantity, that is speed. So here the speed is used to measure the distance in unit time. So the particular time alle object is to distance cover madide anta find out madake, so we are going to use the physical quantity speed. So let me write down the definition of speed. The distance traveled by the object, the distance traveled by the object in unit time. So this is what we call it as speed, or we can also define speed. So there is another way we are going to define speed, that is speed is equal to distance traveled. Speed is equal to distance traveled by time taken. So distance traveled by time taken. So we can define speed in this way, or we can define speed in this way. So now if you just take this, so distance is measured in terms meter, and the time is measured in terms of seconds ಅಲ್ಲಿ measure ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So then what is the SI unit? So SI unit of speed. So speed na SI unit ಏನು ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ that is meter per second. So this is a very important. The standard unit of speed is meter per second. Well, sometimes the distance will be in terms of centimeters irutte. So if the distance is given in terms of centimeter, then the unit will become centimeter per second. Sometimes the distance will be in terms of kilometer irutte. So kilometer iddaga we cannot take the time in terms of seconds ali baralla. So it will come in terms of hours ali barutte. So then the unit will be kilometer per hour. So these are the units for the speed, that is centimeter per second or kilometer per hour. So the main but the standard unit anta kelidalla. So we have to write that is meter per second as the SI unit of speed anta very big. I hope that you are clear with this point. So the next thing that comes to the mind is here in speed ali if you just observe the any signboards, so near the school or hospitals anta bandaga, so they are going to put the signboards. So signboards ಗಳನ್ನ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ರೋಡ್ ಸೈಡ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ನಿಯರ್ ದ ಹಾಸ್ಪಿಟಲ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ನಿಯರ್ ದ ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ಸ್ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಸ್ಪೀಡ್ ಲಿಮಿಟ್ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು 60 ಕಿಲೋಮೀಟರ್ ಪರ್ ಅವರ್ ಅಂತ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ. So what does it mean? So 60 kilometer per hour andre, so the object should travel 60 kilometer in 1 hour. So 1 hour ge object, so athwa the vehicles ಏನಾಗಿರಬಹುದು, so it should travel 60 kilometer na ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, travel ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. In some other places they will put the signboard as the speed limit will be 40 kilometers ಅಂತ ಹಾಕಿರ್ತಾರೆ. So 40 kilometer per hour. So ಅಂದ್ರೆ 1 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ for ಪ್ರತಿ 1 hour ಗೆ object should travel 40 kilometer na travel ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. So here in speed ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಾಗ again in speed we are going to consider only the numerical value. Speed ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು numerical value na ಮಾತ್ರ consider ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So that means speed is having only magnitude. So speed again it is having only magnitude. So if the physical quantity is having only magnitude, then we can call that as a scalar quantity. That means speed is having magnitude and we can call that speed as a scalar quantity anta kariteve. So I hope you are clear with this point. So what does 60 kilometer or 55 kilometer per hour anta hakirtare? I hope that you are clear with that point. So the next then when does the speed will become 1 meter per second, or when will you say the speed is 1 meter per second? Speed yavaga 1 meter per second yavaga agutte? Well, if an object travels 1 meter distance, if an object travels 1 meter distance in 1 second, then we can say the speed will be 1 meter per second. So it is a very important point. So idartha ಏನು ಅಂದ್ರೆ, suppose if an object travel from point A to point B travel ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, so here it has taken a time of 1 second. So in that 1 second it has covered the distance of 1 meter. So 1 second ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು 1 meter distance ಮಾತ್ರ ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. So ಅಥವಾ to move from point B to point C move ಆಗಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ again the time should be 1 second. In that 1 second it has to cover only 1 meter distance na cover ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. Then we can say the speed will be 1 meter per point. So when the object travels 1 meter distance in 1 second, then we say the speed will be 1 meter per second. So the next important point that we are going to discuss regarding to the speed, that is if the motion is a uniform motion. So the object is moving in a uniform motion, then what will happen to the speed, or how we are going to find out the speed and any find out ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ for if the object is moving in a uniform motion. So we have considered the uniform motion. For uniform motion, how we are going to find out the speed? Here, the definition of uniform motion that I wrote is, so in uniform motion, the distance will be equal and the time taken by the object is also equal, right? So this is the definition for the uniform motion. So in case of uniform motion, so what will be the speed or what happens to the speed? So let me find out. Now let us consider the example that an object has moved from point M to point N. So object is moving from point M to point N. So here to move from point M to N, so it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour, it has covered a distance of 75 kilometer. Then how to find out speed for at this point? Well, I told that speed is equal to distance by time taken, correct? So distance is there 75 kilometer. So time will be 1 hour. Then what will be the speed? That is 75 kilometer per hour. So this is the speed, right? Next, suppose if an object moves from point N to point O. So point N ಇಂದ ಈಗ object it is moving to point O ಗೆ move ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ? So this is in the case of uniform motion ನಾವು consider ಮಾಡಿರೋದು. So uniform motion ಅಲ್ಲಿ the time will also equal and the distance covered by the object will also be equal. So again it has covered it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour again it has covered a distance of 75 kilometer. Then how to find out the speed at this point, that is from point N to point O. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ speed ಕಂಡುಹಿಡಿಯಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ speed is equal to again distance by time taken. Distance is to again 75 kilometer and the time is 1 hour. Then the speed will be 75 kilometer per hour. So here if you just observe this example now, so the object is moving with a constant speed at every intervals. So at every instant so the object is moving with a constant speed ಅಲ್ಲಿ move ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. Speed ಏನಾಗ್ತಲ್ಲ changes ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. That is for the uniform motion. So then for uniform motion, so we can write the speed will be constant. Speed will be constant. Or for uniform motion, so we can say the speed will be uniform speed. So the next we shall consider about for the non-uniform motion. So for non-uniform motion, how we are going to find out the speed? So speed and find out ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ for non-uniform motion, or what will happen to the speed in case of non-uniform motion. So here in non-uniform motion, well, I told that in our day-to-day life, so we are not going to follow the uniform motion. So we are going to follow the non-uniform motions na follow ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So sometimes we may go fast, ತುಂಬಾ fast ಆಗಿ move ಆಗ್ತೀವಿ, ಅಥವಾ sometimes we move slow ಆಗಿ move ಆಗ್ತೀವಿ. So in the case of non-uniform motion, so how to find out the speed? Well, for non-uniform motion, I define the distance is unequal, but the time taken will be equal. So this is what I got for non-uniform motion. Correct? So non-uniform moved from point M to point N. So to move from point M to N, it has taken a time of 1 hour. So in that 1 hour, it has covered a distance of 60 kilometers. Then to move from point N to point O, so here again the time taken by the object is 1 hour, but this time it has covered a distance of 50 kilometers because it is a non-uniform motion. So the non-uniform motion the time will be same but the distance covered will be unequal, right? Then how to find out speed for this non-uniform motion? So we cannot use the formula that is speed is equal to distance by time taken. Now use madakagala because here the distance is different. So here distance different irodrinda, so there comes the another quantity that is average speed. So for non-uniform motion, so we are going to use the average speed na use ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So what is average speed andre? So it is nothing but the total distance traveled by total time taken. So this is how we are going to define the average speed for the non-uniform motion, because here the distance covered by the object is not equal. Suppose if you want to find out the speed, so average speed na find out ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ, so average speed is equal to total distance means 60 kilometer plus 50 kilometer, then the total time is 1 hour plus 1 hour. So 60 plus 50 is 110 kilometer, then the total time is 2 hours. So 2 ones are 255. So then the average speed will be 55 kilometer per hour. So to move a distance from point M in the point O, total distance na cover ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ, so if the object travels so 55 kilometer per hour, so ಪ್ರತಿ ಗಂಟೆಗೆ 55 kilometer ಅಷ್ಟು ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ, so it can travel the total distance na ಏನು ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So that is in case of non-uniform motion, the speed will be variable ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ changes ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, it will be not constant. Sometimes slow ಇದು speed may be fast ಹೋಗಬಹುದು, sometimes ನಾವು slow ಹೋಗಬಹುದು. ಸೊ ಆ ತರ ಹೋದಾಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಪೀಡ್ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ವೇರಿಯಬಲ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. or we can also call it as a non-uniform speed ಅಂತನೂ ಕೂಡ ಕರೀಬಹುದು. ಓಕೆನಾ? So this is about what is the speed for the uniform motion and speed for the non-uniform motion. So the next, the last topic in this class, that is, let us assume that the object has traveled a distance of s and it has taken a time of t, then the speed is defined as, or the speed we can write it as speed na we are going to denote it by v in the represent ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. So v is equal to s by t. So this is the formula that we are going to use to find out the speed. So here v represents the speed, t represents the time, and s represents